I'm Kathy Driscoll.
And I'm Sarah.
And we're from the Nature Foundation. We're going to talk to you today about matter. And through matter, we're going to investigate what matter is. We're going to look at the properties of matter, and then later we're going to do some experiments. So, what is matter? What in the world is made of matter?
Well, when I think of the Earth, I think maybe the air. I see that's part of the Earth. We know the soil and maybe the trees that rely on the soil. You know, you can think of the water and the oceans. Basically, matter is anything, any object that takes up space and has mass. And mass is basically how much of a substance there is. So all of these items are matter because they take up space and they have a certain mass.
Excellent. So when we talk about matter, we need to talk a little bit about the basics of that, and that it would consider the building blocks, right?
Right.
Okay, so within matter itself, it's made up of a bunch of things, and these are called atoms. Okay, so I'm holding one ball that's going to represent an atom. And even inside an atom, there are things called particles that make up the mass of one atom. And these are very important parts of an atom. Do you want to discuss what those three parts are?
Yeah, so the three parts of an atom are going to be the protons, the electrons, and the neutrons. So protons have a positive charge, and these are found in the nucleus of the atom. And neutrons are also found in the nucleus of the atom, and these have neutral or no charge to them. On the outside, you'll find electrons, and electrons have negative charges. Now, electrons are moving around, energized, and you never know what position they'll be in exactly at any given moment.
And that's important because they help with bonding an atom together to make what we call a molecule or a compound. So let's step back a second and look at this called the periodic table. Okay? So on a periodic table will show us what's called all of the elements that we find on Earth. In fact, let's talk about the really common elements, and I know you guys know this. The common elements that make up the Earth's crust. So what did we say that probably the most important would be?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. 46% of the Earth's crust is made of oxygen. So that's almost half. All right. And then there's also another one called silicon. And when I think of silicon, I think of Silicon Valley, where computers are made.
Right.
Or I even think of quartz, because quartz is actually a mineral made of silicon. So silicon is 27% in the Earth.
Wow.
I know, that's crazy. And then there's magnesium, and then there's potassium, and then there's sodium, and then there's calcium, and then a little sliver of aluminum. Do these all sound familiar to you? Aluminum is Al. If I look over here on the periodic table, I would look for the symbol for aluminum, and that would be Al. Okay? And the same thing for potassium. So here's our potassium. It's number 19. So that has an atomic number of 19. 19 protons, okay? That puts it in its order. So each one of these atoms has one atomic number, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way down. And they all have things either chemically in common or physically in common. So when I mean physical, I'm talking about like metals and non-metals. But for now, what we need to know is when we take two of the very same type of atom, such as oxygen, if we put two oxygen atoms together, like this, two oxygen atoms together, that is called a molecule. So 1 plus 1 equals 2.
So O2.
O2, which is the oxygen that we breathe. Very good. Okay, so that is a molecule. Now let's make it a little more complicated, shall we? You mentioned water.
Right, water is a compound.
A compound. Very good. So I'm going to have you write down a compound. So water is actually made up of an atom of the hydrogen element and in this case it's two hydrogens, 1 and 2, that are attracted to one of the oxygen atom. And I said attracted, notice that there is a bond. They are connected together to make, shall we say it?
H2O.
H2O. Pure, simple water. That is a compound. Let's look at another more complicated version of a compound. Check this out. So, if you notice on this beaker, there are these symbols for each of those elements that we talked about. Here's oxygen, here's a carbon with 3 hydrogen, and it's connected to a nitrogen, that's connected to an oxygen, that's connected to another nitrogen. And these guys are all bonded together because of those crazy electrons we talked about. And this makes up a big compound called, well, I call it coffee. Caffeine. This is my coffee mug. Okay? So that makes a compound. After that, what happens? When we've got our compounds together, we've got our molecules all made up of our atoms that make up
Matter.
Very good.
Essentially.
So we need to remember what matter is all about.
So matter will come in 3 main different forms. We have the liquids, we have the solids, and the gases. Now, a lot of these compounds that you'll see might form as a gas or as a liquid substance. So we're going to dive into that and how we can classify these different kinds of matter. So, looking at this beaker, is there anything in it? Well, there's actually air in it. So, what happens if I pour water into it? If I pour water into this beaker, the water will push out the air, so it is displacing the air in the beaker as I pour the water into it. And when you're measuring, you should always look at the meniscus, which is where it dips in the water. It'll make a little cone shape. And you look at the line on your beaker, and this one, when I count, it says about 29. So this is 29 milliliters. So I know that when I poured water into the tube, that displaced the air that was in it. That's known as displacement. But what happens if you take maybe 3 different substances and you put them together? Well, let's think about baking a cake. You might have eggs, you might have water, and you might have flour. If you mix those 3 things together, that's a mixture because there's 3 different substances.
Okay, so for this part, we are going to actually do some experiments. That means you're going to have to find some items around the house. Okay, I will have a experiment form for you to print out, and you read the instructions on the experiment forms and you follow them and find out what of these experiments, their properties of matter are they. For example, experiment number 1, I want you to get 3 items around the house, like a toy, maybe a ball, and ask for a quarter from mom or somebody. Okay? So for this experiment, you're going to read the instructions, and it's going to ask you to do a few things, including poking at it maybe with a pencil to decide if your experiment or these items are going to be a solid, liquid, or gas. This is our time to experiment with the three properties: solid, liquid, and gas. Experiment number 1, find those items. Experiment number 2 is going to require a little bit of water. And we talked about displacement earlier. Well, we are measuring volume when it comes to liquid, so we have to have something to measure with. So you're going to measure a quarter cup of water, and you're going to need a little bit of dish soap and a plastic bag. Okay? Then follow the instructions for this experiment and answer the questions. Okay? And then you're going to go to experiment number 3, which means you're going to need an empty bottle of water or empty soda bottle. Okay? And if you can ask around the house if you can get a little bit of white vinegar and baking soda, a balloon, an empty balloon, and a funnel. Okay? That's experiment number 3. So for experiment number 3, you're going to have an empty bottle, you're going to have vinegar, you're going to have baking soda, a funnel, and a balloon. And then you follow those instructions. Now, I'm including some measurement skills here too. So it's going to ask you to measure out a quarter cup of vinegar, okay? And then you're going to need a teaspoon for the baking soda, okay? And you're going to put the vinegar in the bottle. You're going to take your baking soda, well, actually you're going to take your balloon, and put the lip of the balloon on the bottom of the funnel. And this is a rather large funnel, so if you have a smaller one, it'd be easier to work with. Take your teaspoon and dump that into the funnel, and then tap it down until your baking soda is in the bottom of the balloon. Okay? Make sure the dry matter is in the balloon and the wet matter is in the bottle. Okay? We're going to then make a mixture. Okay? So once you've done that, make sure you read your instructions that you did this correctly. You're going to take the lip of the balloon and put it over the bottle, like that, that has the vinegar. Make sure it's on tight, and then you're going to dump the baking soda that's in the balloon out into the vinegar. And I want you to think about, hypothesize what's going to happen when you add a dry matter to a wet matter. All right, then we will talk about part 2. So go get your items.